I don't know what that thing is in the corner of the screen. I'll get that fixed in the next few minutes. You guys probably wouldn't have noticed it, but I did. Got to get my act together over here. Welcome to the show, everybody. This is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. I'm your host, Dan Bespris, and coming up in just a matter of moments, maybe like 2 minutes or so, you know him as NBA Fantasy Bible. I know him as Dan. He's another Dan. We got a lot of Dans in the fantasy space, and we all rock. That's the one thing I know for sure. Dan McKee is his name. He is NBA Fantasy Bible, and he's coming up here with his second half winners, stashes, silly seasoners, whatever you want to call it. That is right around the corner. Before we settle in, a shout out to our buddies over at Bet Online. With the Super Bowl fast approaching, this is the perfect time to get down with Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for online betting in 2025. You like props? Everybody likes props. Super Bowl props are the damn best. It's the biggest betting day of the whole year. So you know you got to get down. Plus, they got NBA, because that's why you follow me for NBA takes. College hoops, NHL, UFC. They'll get baseball going in the not too distant future. They got it. If it's there, you can play with it. Every touchdown, every three-pointer, and every hat trick, BetOnline has you covered with odds, stats, and more on every game, every play, and every win. They're such an amazing partner for us to have here on this podcast. I truly don't know at all where we'd be without them. Bet Online, the game starts here. Follow me on Twitter at Dan Bespris, DanBesbris. Thank you to the many of you that have subscribed in the last couple of days. We've seen a nice little jump over at Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball, so let's keep that going. Hit those subscriptions, hit those 5-star reviews, and pre-like our trade deadline live show. That's one thing I do need from you guys before we bring in our guest today. However, like I said, about 2 minutes, almost exactly 2 minutes. Let's chat with Dan now. There he is, fellow Dan. I love having Dans on the show because then nobody can stop Dans from doing whatever Dans want to do. You all know him as NBA Fantasy Bible. I call him Dan. You might call him D-Mac. What you should know most importantly is that this is, like, from a time zone standpoint, probably the hardest one to schedule. So I'm grateful that you got up. Is the sun even up yet for you right now?
Sun has just come up. It's 6:30 a.m. So it's not too bad. Yeah, okay. I'll be getting the kids ready for the day ahead. But yeah, thanks for having me on, Dan.
No, thanks for coming back. So everybody knows, like, when I have a guest on the show, the guest is in charge. You said you had one name that's been covered a few times on the show that you wanted to sort of like hit the nail in just a little bit harder on that one. And then I believe you have 5 other names we're going to work our way through one by one. So, D-Mac, who's the one that you wanted to sort of double up on? And then you can just glide right into your first new name.
Had we done this a couple of weeks ago, I think the name Isaiah Collier would have been, wow, what a great stash. But I think now he's practically a pickup, almost a must-roster guy. The fact that he's moved into the starting lineup ahead of Keontae George. We spoke about Keontae George and Isaiah Collier briefly on your Palisades Fire fundraiser show 12 days ago, I think it was.
Can you believe that?
I mentioned, I can't believe that. The time has flown. I mentioned Collier as someone that I was intrigued by. And I think now that's coming to fruition very early for the tanking Utah Jazz. So I think he's probably already picked up in a lot of spots. But if he's not, go and grab him anyway. But the 5 guys that I wanted to really mention that haven't mentioned or been mentioned on some of your previous shows. Number 1, Keon Ellis. I think overnight we heard about De'Aaron Fox that could be moved. My biggest concern, I'm just saying, be mindful. I'm thinking that Sacramento don't want to blow it all up. So I would think that if there was to be a trade for Fox, that there would be a significant piece going back. I don't think they're in the tanking game. I think they're there to compete. So Keon Ellis, just monitor that one. But if you do have the ability to stash Keon, I would do so because we know that as a starter, he's more than just a steal streamer. At this stage, he's just a steal streamer. But if he does get into that starting lineup, I think he can be a bit of a difference maker in your leagues.
I love that call. And when the De'Aaron Fox news broke, that was the first thought that popped into my head because there's no guarantee that whoever comes back is going to be a guard. You know, it could be, I know that the Kings have been looking for someone to play a more prominent role at a big man spot, someone that maybe can protect the rim a little bit more, since that's not really Sabonis's area of expertise. And like, yes, I agree with you wholeheartedly. Someone probably does come back. Like some of the trades you hear getting kicked around with the Spurs would bring back, like a Stefan Castle, who, yeah, he's a guard, but is he going to immediately get 30-something minutes with the Kings? Probably not. Would they bring back someone like a Jeremy Sohan? I don't know. Would Chris Paul end up back in Sacramento? Would he end up on a third team? There's all these different machinations of how this type of thing could go down. And like, I don't know about you, Dan, but like from a fantasy standpoint, I think we've all been lusting for Keon Ellis to have a more feature role, because we saw it briefly when Fox was out for a couple of games. He had a sore butt. Keegan Murray had a sore back. Like there were these little glimpses of what could be, and I'm trying to put the game log up on the screen for people to look at, like 17-8 with 3 steals, a block, and 3 3-pointers, 13-4-3, 3 steals, a block, 2 3-pointers. He does a lot of things, but he's got to get up around 28, 29, 30 minutes to do it. There's a pathway to that if someone gets moved out of the way. And there's, by the way, like Fox might have to get packaged with someone. There might be somebody else that goes out. So it's hard to know how this whole thing shakes out. But man, the sky is the limit for Keon Ellis. He's like Alex Caruso from last year, but I would argue healthier. So that's like, there's a lot to like there is basically, I think, where I'm landing with it.
I'm excited by Keon. I think his game, his fantasy game particularly, is not predicated on high usage. So if a high usage guy does happen to come back, I don't think that's the end of the world. And as you were saying, it really comes down to his minutes, his playing time. If he's a starter or not the most important thing, but it comes down to playing time. So if he can get, like you said, the high 20s, low 30 minutes, I think he's in for a really nice end of the season.
Yep, I'm with you on that one. DMAC, where would you like to go for player number 2?
Yeah, this one has been discussed a little bit, but I think overnight, this guy is more of a stash now, Donovan Clingan.
Mm-hmm.
So when he was starting, and he has started 10 games for the Portland Trailblazers, but we know that DeAndre Ayton came back yesterday, had a very nice ball game. Having said that, Clingan played ahead of Time Lord. Time Lord didn't play at all yesterday. Clingan had a disappointing game, and even in his starts prior to yesterday's game, he was a little bit lackluster. But we know in his 10 starts, and I will let you know, 10 starts, he's averaged 6.8 points, 9.9 rebounds, 2.9 blocks. You can't get those types of blocks just off the waiver wire any day of the week. So if you have the ability to stash, I'd be looking at stashing Clingan, because we know what Portland does at the end of seasons, particularly now that they're obviously struggling. They're going to play this guy, whether there's a trade for Ayton or not. I think silly season, it's going to be Clingan time. So if you have that ability to stash him now, please do so.
What would you say to folks that say, you know what, DMAC, I have trouble stashing a guy who's really not doing very much? How long do you think you can sit on someone who might only play 11, 12, 13 minutes? Can we make it to the trade deadline? Can a team just weather it for a week? Would you talk them into that?
I would. For a week, even if you had to drop 1 week, one matchup, I would do that, because I think the runway is quite a long runway to the end of the season. Clingan could be starting as soon as next week. We don't know for a fact. Ayton may not be moved, but I just think that he's got a longer pathway to some fantasy value for potentially just one wasted week. And it's not completely wasted. It is an active stash, but he's not doing as much as we'd like him to do in a 12-team league. But I think the sky's the limit for this guy.
Yeah, I think I'm with you on that one. It's so easy to get wrapped up in this idea of like, I got to get something out of everybody all the time. It's easier, I think, to stash a guy like a Clingan right now who's not doing a ton with Ayton back if you don't have a bunch of other injuries on your team, because you don't want to just get shellacked for a week. But I would also say, like, this is the week you want to use your moves on stashes. Next week, you want to save your moves for the actual trades that go down. You don't want to be blowing your weekly moves like on Monday of trade deadline week on a guess when a bunch of stuff might happen on Thursday morning, and you want to have all 4 of your weekly moves to do stuff then. So I'm totally with you. I just think it was kind of a fun exercise to say, like, what do you tell somebody who's like, yeah, but he sucks right now? You say, yeah, well, like, a lot of guys suck. Just pretend that he's some guy you rostered all year that's in a 3-game slump or something like that. I don't know. Like, D-Mac, doesn't it feel a little bit like mental gymnastics sometimes with fantasy sports?
Yeah, it absolutely does. And sometimes taking an L to get a longer term W is the way to go. And I think this is the time to do it. And to your point earlier, we mentioned it, or Kayla and I mentioned it on our show earlier in the week. Make your moves now. Save your moves for trade deadline, because you could be making pickups within minutes of each other. You could be picking someone up and then all of a sudden the trade goes down that is better and provides better value for you. You could be making multiple moves within a few minutes of each other,
Yep.
particularly towards the end of the trade deadline.
Oh, 100% yes. This is the week for speculating. Next week is the week for knowing. You make the moves on things you know on trade deadline week. The week before is the week you make the moves on things that you may or may not know. By the way, we have a trade deadline live show coming up next Thursday, and D-Mac will be on it. Before you fall asleep, is that what we ended up deciding?
It'll be before I fall asleep, and then several hours later, I've just worked out with Kayla, we'll be doing a wrap-up show. So I'll probably get maybe 5 or 6 hours sleep in between. So we'll be fine.
You maniac. You're going to sleep. So I know this is tangential and idiotic, but like there is literally one day the entire calendar where I'm glad that I'm on Pacific time, and it's trade deadline morning. Like this is the one day that I look at you guys on the other side of the Pacific and I'm just like, finally, you buttheads have to stick it out on a tough one, because every other night, like Kingy and Josh and all these guys, you guys are, and everybody's dropping their nightly recap shows like the second the games end. And I'm looking around, my kids are asleep, a door and a half over. It's 10:30 Pacific time. I can't record a pod and scream into the microphone, or everybody in my apartment is going to get pissed at me. Meanwhile, you guys, it's the middle of your afternoon, not a care in the world. Finally, I get my sweet West Coast comeuppance here. So anyway, Donovan Clingan is an interesting one, and he's more interesting now. And I know we have a bunch more names to get to, so I don't want to slow us up too much. But I think he's really interesting because, a game and a half back when he was starting, he was a really easy guy to make a case for, because I was like, well, you might just get a bunch of stuff like active stash. Inactive stash, he's a tougher one. You might see him hit some waiver wires of teams that are like, I can't afford to lose this week. And you might be able to scoop him up like at the perfect time for something to shake out. D-Mac, before we get to your next name, before you get to name number 3 on your list 05, what are you working on these days? Tell me about where everybody can find you and the pods and all that good stuff.
Yeah, still working with Kayla. Between Two Hoops is our show, so we do that on a weekly basis. We just had our own stash show. We tend to do our ads and drops show, as well as our buy lows and sell highs. But keep an eye out for NBA Fantasy Bible on YouTube. Of course, give us a follow on Twitter and Blue Sky. And of course, Kayla Fonte, who's a good friend of yours as well, Dan.
Absolutely. She and I are recording actually this would be like right around when you're going to sleep tonight, I think is when we're recording. So first thing tomorrow morning for us. D-Mac, player number 3, who's next?
Number 3, look, I wanted to bring up Jalen Smith, but I know that he was discussed on a previous show, but I'm excited by Jalen Smith. Just his per minute value is fantastic. My only hesitation is I don't know if Vooch is going to be moved. By all accounts, his contract could be quite difficult to move. So I'm not going to actually go into great detail about Jalen Smith. I just wanted to mention him as someone to monitor. But we know that if Vooch is perhaps moved, and we've discussed this, it seems like year on year, we just talk about Zach LaVine and Nikola Vucevic being moved. I'm excited by Jalen Smith, and I think that he's more than just a backup center. I think they brought him in during the offseason for a reason. It's not just to be a backup. I think it was a little bit of a guarantee behind Vooch, depending on how the Bulls were going this season. Hasn't been that bad for the Bulls this season. I think there's been levels of improvement, but just keep an eye out for Jalen Smith. I think he could be someone to monitor. So I'm not saying necessarily stash, but on or close to trade deadline, just be careful and be monitoring the situation with Vooch.
Yeah, and it's funny because like we were talking to Mike Barner a couple of days back, and he was like, at the beginning of the year, if you had asked me, I'd have said I thought Zach LaVine. I'm quoting him now. Mike said he would have thought Zach LaVine was the guy getting moved. Now he thinks it's probably Vooch, because you hear him getting linked to the Lakers, you hear him getting linked to the Warriors, you hear him getting linked to teams, the Mavs, like a bunch of teams that suddenly need a center, or I guess it was maybe kind of obvious that some of them needed a center before. So he's a big Jalen Smith guy. And I'm with you on that one. Like, But here's the thing, though. When we're talking about these guys, like Jalen Smith, and now with Ayton back, like Donovan Clingan, you really can't hold more than one. So you kind of have to prioritize who you like on that list. Did you want to go farther on Jalen Smith? Was he your third guy, or did you want to keep hustling to somebody else?
I want to keep hustling to someone else.
Okay.
I just wanted to mention his name as someone to
him.
monitor closer to the deadline. My third guy is another big man. It's Day'Ron Sharpe.
Yeah.
And you might look at me going, what are you thinking? Claxton's still playing. But Claxton's not playing heavy minutes. Sharpe is trending up, even with Claxton still starting. I like Sharpe's game, and we've seen on occasion when Claxton has missed. Occasionally, the Nets have done some funny stuff and played small ball. They've still got Ben Simmons there, but I really like Day'Ron Sharpe's game, and he's another fantastic per minute value guy that I'm keeping an eye out for.
I'm glad you brought him up. And the funny thing is, so one other person did mention Sharpe, but that episode hasn't aired yet, and it was Adam King. So that's going to be 2 on Sharpe. And one thing that Kingy and I were talking about is, and D-Mac, I'd love your thoughts on this as well. Sharpe's offensive rebounding numbers are insane right now. Have you looked at those things lately? It's out of control.
I have. I paid heavy attention to that only because I play in the league, and it's my hometown league that includes offensive rebounds as one of our categories. It's an 11 cat. So I pay close attention to Day'Ron Sharpe's game, and yeah, he's killing it. He's got the read on the ball similar to Dennis Rodman used to do. Maybe he's just got that ability to read the spin of the ball. I know that Rodman made it a bit of a science, but Day'Ron Sharpe's got similar types of ability there on the rebounding end.
Do you think that this is a trade deadline pivot, or do you think this is more of a silly season pivot, or somewhere in between?
It's somewhere in between. I think he's going to have some silly season value anyway. I don't think, and look, he's 23 years old. Nick Claxton's 25, so they're not going to rest the old man. Claxton's not old by any means, but I think he's probably got more value, Claxton, that is, more value on the trade market. So perhaps they're looking after their commodity in a sense and playing more of Sharpe here. So I think there's a tremendous ability, even if Claxton stays on the team, for Sharpe to show his wares down the stretch.
Yeah, this one, he's a fun one too, because I don't know, certain things get my fantasy juices flowing, and traditional bigs right now, for whatever reason, is that. I don't know why. I think it's just because they're sort of vanishing. Everybody's got to shoot the 3 ball now. So then when you see a guy who's out there getting 7 offensive rebounds in a game, 3 steals and a block, and, you know, scoring at a whatever it is. Yeah, I think he's only in the low 50s right now, but that probably trends up if he plays with better guys around him. You know, 50 to 60% shooting from the field. You hope the free throw number can stick. I don't know, because, you know, he's at 59 and 64, 61. He's at 76% this year. Is that actually going to stick? Hard to say. But there is a pretty interesting fantasy profile of big man who gets defensive stats, who gets a ton of rebounds. And again, like, he's an easier one probably to convince people of, because he's actually posting some value right now. And we saw it in the last game. Nick Claxton fouled out, and Sharpe went for a double-double with 3 steals and a block. So kind of a fun play as well. Talking to at NBA Fantasy Bible on social media. I call him Dan. You can call him whatever the hell you want. Take me to player number 4.
Number 4. So more of a deeper stash, but we love this guy, Kelly Olynyk.
I love me some Kelly Olynyk.
I think there's some value there. I'm going to think that they'll be tanking hard over in Toronto. I think he's got some value there. And I know Jakob Poeltl's still playing and playing very well, very, very high level, but are they going to look after him? I don't think they're going to trade Jakob Poeltl. So this is not a trade deadline stash, but it's a silly season stash. Jakob Poeltl, I think, is still going to be on that team past trade deadline. But whether or not he plays down the stretch is another question. But I think Kelly Olynyk, we've seen it in the past. We saw it last season. As early as last season, Kelly Olynyk can provide fantastic value in fantasy, particularly in category leagues, but across the board, we just know that he's a fantasy darling, bit of a unicorn for us. And I know that you've loved him for many, many years, Dan.
I really have. Sometimes I think you guys bring up Kelly Olynyk just to soften me up for some bad news. Yeah, I mean, if we're thinking about the Houston year, Kelly Olynyk, that was a league-winning type of run. He was a second rounder down the stretch. And then even last year, which again wasn't quite as impressive as Houston Kelly, but that, you know, post Jakob Poeltl injury Toronto run, and I'll scroll down a little bit here. He was at 26.5 minutes with the Raptors last year, 13, 5.5, and 4.5 with 1.3 steals. He had a 3-pointer, 55-82 splits. I love me some Kelly Olynyk. He is effectively, he's a guy that with the right amount of usage can actually be in all 9 categories, dude. That's a hard feat to achieve. He's not going to be like Kawhi Leonard level, but he's so good at category leagues. You know what? I'll say too, I think Pirtle is kind of a dark horse to be traded, even though you said you didn't think he might be. Just the number of teams right now that need a center. And I don't know if you remember this, D-Mac, and I had kind of forgotten it until you just brought up Olynyk. But at the very beginning of the year, there was a preseason interview with the Raptors where Pirtle said something like, well, we know we're not trying to win every game this year. And it's like, oh, we're doing the quiet part out loud now, aren't we? So I think he knows that, like, maybe he doesn't end up there. His career is not on the same trajectory as when the Raptors want to win. Again, every trade is a low percentage probability. There's a small chance that any one of these guys gets moved that we're talking about, but it's non-zero. And like the difference between 0 and 5 to 10% with trade deadline stuff, that's the whole universe. That's what we're talking about here. Now, Olynyk is out. He just got ruled out for the ball game that's about to start when we're recording this with a calf issue. How real it is, we don't know at this time of year, but you did it, man. You mentioned Kelly Olynyk, and now I can't stop myself. Say something. Take
the
over.
Juices. Got the juices flowing. The Kelly Olynyk juices. I know a lot of fantasy guys love him as well. Get on the Kelly Olynyk island. I think that's a Matt Smith special as well.
Yep. He and I have a timeshare out there.
Oh, absolutely. You both do. In a roto situation, I think you just pick him up now because you see the across the board type of value there in roto would just be fantastic. You don't start him now. By no means do you start him now, but come trade deadline past that, if Jakob is moved, my God, you start him with confidence. In a head-to-head situation, a little bit more difficult. You said he's out for today's game. Another guy that you just really want to monitor closer to that trade deadline come about a week from now, which is coming up very quickly, Dan.
We can dream. We can dream. Give me number 5, baby.
Number 5, my last one. This guy is completely out of the rotation at Phoenix. Another big guy.
I know where you're going.
Jusuf Nurkic. I think he's still got some value. He's got some old legs, but I think he's still got some value. He's completely out of the rotation. So he's probably available in a lot of head-to-head leagues. People are just fed up with the donuts, the zeros. So they've dropped him. He's a stash. I think he can provide some value down the stretch. I don't think he's going to be on the Suns post the deadline. So depending on where he ends up, I think he can have some value. Again, one of those monitor situations. And again, in a roto situation, you might just want to pick him up. Games cap situation, pick him up, see where it goes.
Yeah, that one's a crazy one. And you could see it after his little altercation. I already forgot who that was with. Was that with a Houston player? It doesn't matter. When during the post-game interview, all of his teammates were just kind of like, yeah, it happened. Normally, when guys get in a fight, there's this whole like, yeah, we're going to protect our guy. We got our dudes back. Not one of those dudes on Phoenix was like, yeah, we got Jusuf's back. It was all just like, yeah, it happened. They were so clearly fed up with Nurk that you like, if you were like really reading the tea leaves on that, it was, they don't want anything to do with this dude. So his not at all gradual phase out was kind of telegraphed a little bit. Like if you lose your teammates, you're just screwed. Because like players fight with coaches all the time, but that brotherhood, and he was just not a part of it. But you're right. Like they can't possibly sit on him. There's got to be some team out there that's willing to just give him another look. Even if he can't guard anybody, he's still better than what a lot of guys have as a backup center. And like he can rebound, he can pass, he can score. Again, he can't defend, but he does get defensive stats because he's just sort of roaming and doing silly things on defense. You treat him like he's injured, right?
Yeah, and I believe he's on an expiring contract as well. So that is quite, for those tanking teams or those guys that want to take on that contract and just free the books for next season, I think that's quite attractive to some of these other teams as well. So $19 million expiring contract, I think he's a massive trade candidate to get out. So a little bit dissimilar to what the other guys were, where they would get some value by other people being moved. He's got some potential value by being moved himself. So again, watch this space for Jusuf Nurkic, but I'm excited by him. And we've seen in the past, he's not going to get back to a few seasons ago when he was a top 30 guy for one season. We're never going to see that again. But you could get a top 100 guy out of Jusuf Nurkic. But yeah, watch this space on him.
You mean we're never going to get bubble Nurkic back, who shot 90% at the free throw line?
Oh my.
That was an absurd 8 days. So
I guess we're never going to get TJ Warren back either. So similar situation.
Oh, that one hurt me. I loved TJ Warren. His game was super 9-cat friendly, and then he blew his foot out, and then gained about 40 pounds because he couldn't keep his conditioning. And he can't keep up with these dudes anymore. So in looking at this list, because again, people have to be sort of judicious with how they use their moves and roster spaces. If you were to, I don't want to say rank them because that's kind of impossible, but maybe tiers of the guys you've mentioned, Collier, Ellis, Clingan, Jalen Smith, Sharpe, Olynyk, and Nurk, how do they fall into tiers for you if people are kind of prioritizing who you expect to have the best chance to succeed?
I think Collier number one, because he's just doing so much as we speak right now. For me, I really like Clingan. So I would put Clingan, even though he's not doing much with Ayton, I really like Clingan. So I'd have him at the tier below. Sharpe's not too far off, and he's doing more in his, I guess, part-time role or shared role with Claxton than Clingan is. So maybe they're in a similar tier there. And then more for the monitoring aspect, I would put Ellis, Olynyk, and Nurkic all about the same tier as well. Probably more Nurkic below those guys just because he's not playing at the moment. But I think he's got some good potential. So, yeah, probably 3 tiers there. Collier 1, Clingan and Sharpe 2, and the rest at tier 3.
The riffraff gets tier 3. He is NBA Fantasy Bible on social media. Mediac? I combined media and DMAC. Congratulations to me. I obviously need to sleep a little bit more. NBA Fantasy Bible on social media. DMAC in real life, or you can just call him Dan because that's the best damn name in fantasy. DMAC, I'll see you in like a week on the live show. It's going to be so much freaking fun.
Cannot wait. I'm looking forward to that, Dan. Thank you for having me on, and thanks to all your listeners and followers.
Follow him immediately. Dude, you're the best. Thank you again.
Thanks, Dan. Absolute pleasure. See you guys.
And that was our good buddy DMAC. I had a bit of a technical issue at the end of the show, so I had to cut a few things together here. Some of you might have noticed, others didn't. I don't know. It doesn't really matter either way. In any event, follow DMAC on Twitter at NBA Fantasy Bible. And if you made it to this part of the show, you know the drill, the rule is you got to subscribe at this point. Make sure to like the video. Follow me on Twitter at Dan Bespris or at Old Man Squad over on the Blue Sky Network. And if you have an opportunity to check out our buddies over at, yes, it's our brand new partnership with UnderdogFantasy.com. Use promo code OLDMAN, OLDMAN, or just click on the link in the show description. Sign up today for a deposit match bonus of up to $1,000 and a free play. It's so simple, too. You go to the website, you click on the NBA tab if you want to go NBA. If you know other sports, great. Use the freebie to make sure that your card just gets a little bit easier. You just pick higher or lower on different plays related to different players. If you think someone's going to score more than 19.5 points or whatever, you go higher on that one. You guys have followed me along a little bit here. You've seen the way that I've gone higher on some PRAs, point, rebound, assist totals, some lowers. We hit our one on, what day was that? Tuesday night. That was so much fun. There's so much excitement when it hits. And if you get 2, 3, 4, whatever, if you really make a big, thick card, you can do 3x, 5x, 8x, 10x, 20x on your initial bet. So it's really, really cool. It's super fun. If you know your ball, it's a great way to turn it into some extra cash on the daily basis. Again, that's UnderdogFantasy.com. Promo code OLDMAN so they know who sent you. That part is also very important. Thanks for watching, everybody. Again, thank you to DMAC. Awesome list of great stashes. Use your roster moves wisely and try to bring it on home. Again, hit that like button on the Trade Deadline live show and on this one. Subscribe, drop the 5-star review, and I'll see you guys over on social media. Again, I don't know when these shows are dropping, so we'll see you when we see you. But thanks so much for tuning in. Comments are open. We'll talk to you soon.